We're in the book of Genesis, chapter 4. Got a couple of more verses to conclude our study of this chapter. And that is verse 25. We begin today, this evening, there where you are in Kenya. Verse 25, Genesis 4 says, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God, said she, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. Now, for God said, she, while deviating from our history of Adam for a little bit, in order to take up the story of Cain, we're returned now to Adam and his posterity. Been reading about Cain and Abel. Now we go back to read some more about Adam and Eve. Eve's statement here regarding the birth of Seth is interesting as well as important in our study of the righteous seed that was promised to her in chapter 3, verse 15. Although an outcast from the garden, and especially from the tree of life, Eve is still obviously sensitive to the plan of God. We don't know how much later this is after they have been expelled from the garden. But anyway, we know that she has given birth to two sons, Cain and Abel, and any other children we don't know. But it would seem from what we read about Cain getting married, she must have bore some daughters as well. But anyway, she says that God hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel. So she knew that Seth picked up the rightful progeny of the promised seed that Abel had taken from him when Cain, his brother, killed him. So he comes back and fits into the lineage. And by Eve saying here another seed, although she had no doubt given birth to probably several children by now, but again, we're not told for sure. But this birth is more important, as Seth, he's going to continue the righteous line. Notice also Paul picks up something of interest in Galatians 3:16, where he wrote, now to Abraham and his seed were the promise made. He saith not unto seeds as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Christ. It is seed, not seeds, that carry the promise of Genesis 3 and verse 15 all the way to Bethlehem, which was, it'd be an interesting journey if we could pick out every one of them and carry them down to Bethlehem. And then the verse 26 that concludes chapter 4, to Seth, and to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. This last phrase attracted a lot of different views when I began to look at different commentators about this expression, then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. One commentator, he said, some have called Genesis 4:26 the first revival, because it is the first indication of a spiritual resurgence after a clear decline. And others looked at it different ways, and we looked at different commentaries and to get an opinion of what others were saying about it. For instance, John Gill, he gave a lengthy but an interesting explanation. He writes, seeing the Cainites incorporating themselves and joining families together and building cities and carrying on their civil and religious affairs among themselves, they also formed themselves into distinct bodies and not only separated from them, but called themselves by a different name. For so the words may be rendered, then began men to call themselves, or to be called by the name of the Lord, the sons of God as distinct from the sons of men, which distinction may be observed in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 2, and has been retained more or less ever since. And on we could read of commentaries and their opinions here. But anyway, some wrote, let me read one more reference, particularly by the name of the blessed God to make idols of them. And some of them say, particularly Maimonides, that Enos himself erred and fell into idolatry and was the first inventor of images. Again, opinions. Anyway, I do believe that this phrase is an indication that Enos began the practice of idolatry. But again, that's opinion. The Anchor Bible translator, commentator, Mr. Spicer, he translates it this way. To Seth, in turn, a son was born, and he named him Enosh. It was then that the name Yahweh was first invoked. Interesting. Well, just as the early church, as Acts 11:26, became identified by a different and unique name that separated them from the mind of the people, from the formal religious systems of that day, I believe this period made a notable distinction between the seed of Cain and the seed of Seth, because the holy progeny lineage is going to continue all the way to Bethlehem. Let's begin our study at chapter 5, which gives to us the genealogy of Adam. Mr. Hawker, Robert Hawker, wrote, this is a very interesting chapter, though at the first view it seems to contain nothing but the pedigree of the 5 patriarchs. But when we consider that this is the pedigree which uniformly leads to the promised seed, and it's not until it is summed up in the person of the Lord Jesus Christ. It is not what the apostle calls the fables of endless genealogies, 1 Timothy 1:4, but contains the power of an endless life, Hebrews 7:16. This chapter is further remarkable for containing the short lives and short history of the patriarchs before the flood, including no less a period of than 1,656 years. Mr. Hawker. Verse 1 of chapter 5 reads, this is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. Let me borrow from the Living Torah and the translation of the first 2 verses. In the Torah we read, on the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female. He blessed them and named them man, Adam, or Adam, on the day they were created. Matthew Henry writes, this chapter is the only authentic history extant of the first age of the world from the creation to the flood, containing, according to the verity of the Hebrew text, 1,656 years, as may easily be computed by the ages of the patriarchs before they begat that son through whom the line went down to Noah. I like the words of David Guzik as well. He writes, thoughts on genealogies. One can arrange the following genealogies in a sequential manner and chart out a timeline. However, one cannot establish an absolutely reliable timeline with this method because biblical genealogies are not always complete. Sometimes generations are skipped over. The end of quote. Now, in the likeness of God made he him. Well, this was man's beginning when he's enjoyed the holy tris, if you will, of Jehovah, Yahweh, in the cool of the day. A time when man was innocent. He didn't know what sin was. He was in such a likeness of God that he named the animals as they were brought before him. He was no blubbering idiot dwelling in a cave somewhere, but in the Garden of Paradise. But man lost that likeness along with the holy tris with Yahweh when he disobeyed the commandment of God and ate of that fruit. Notice verse 2, male and female created he them and blessed them and called their name Adam in the day when they were created. Borrowing again Spicer from the Anchor Bible, he translates, he created them male and female, and when they were created, he blessed and named them man. Another statement by Spicer, he tells us, this passage tells us at last of the naming of Adam and named them man. The author's way of saying this is how mankind began. This expression in this verse, called their name Adam, or if you will, man. It was sin that brought the separation from Yahweh and the introduction of chaos to the family structure. And the term pronounced in the beginning by Yahweh, they shall be one flesh, has witnessed the sin which has brought about divisions and divorces to the marriage structure that is even worse today. In verse 3, Adam lived 130 years. He begat his son in his own likeness after his image and called his name Seth. Now, we have no way of knowing the age of Abel when he was killed. But with his death, the righteous lineage stopped. And now, with the birth of Seth, however much later that was from the death of Seth, we don't know, or Abel, rather, excuse me, how much later than at the death of Abel, the birth of Seth occurred, we don't know. That righteous lineage continues. And when it says Adam lived 130 years, from what? From the garden or from Abel? We don't know. But it will, anyway, this will continue to the time when Bethlehem will witness the culmination of that promise in chapter 3, verse 15. Now, the Hebrew name Seth or Sheth means substitute, appoint. So it's through Seth that the promised seed was appointed to continue the promise again that was given. Verse 4, the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. Mr. Guzik, in his commentary, tells us about this statement, he had sons and daughters. This tells us that Adam had many other sons and daughters who are not specifically named in the scriptures. And these daughters became the wives for the sons of Adam. The word of Mr. Guzik, Well, only the names of those that were primary characters in the plan of God are mentioned throughout the Old Testament history. It's possible that Adam and Eve had dozens of children, but the names of those that are involved or were involved in the history of the plan of redemption are mentioned in order, and that is Cain, Abel, Seth, and now Enosh. In the age which we find ourselves living since Calvary, every name is important, and every name is included in God's record book. It's called the Lamb's Book of Life, Revelation 20 and verse 12. And all the days that Adam lived, verse 5, were 930 years, and he died. This is interesting. The term that did not have to be said about Adam or man if it had not been for that action in the garden. That which began with such beauty and such bliss, well, it ended with sorrow and regret. And that which began in a beautiful garden and peace and life ends in a world of trouble and division. And our world is getting worse and more divided. The record that seldom mentioned the ages of the wives in the Old Testament. Sarah, the wife of Abraham, is the only wife of the patriarchs that in which we know the name, the mention of her name at her death in Genesis 23 and 1. So here we have the age of Adam when he died, but no mention is even made of Eve again. Now, verse 6, we read, and Seth lived 105 years and begat Enos. And this is the continuation of the righteous seed. John Wesley writes, we have here all that the Holy Ghost thought to fit to leave upon record concerning 5 of the patriarchs before the flood: Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalaleel, and Jared. There is nothing observable concerning any of these, particularly, though we have reason to think that they were men of eminence, both for prudence and piety in their day. But in general, observe how largely and expressly their generations are recorded. In verse 5, we begin the genealogy. Seth lived after he begat Enos 807 years and begat sons and daughters. Verse 8, all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. Seth by name is mentioned from birth to death 7 times, and he moves off the recorded